Very happy to have with us today the Cincinnati-based drummer, Anthony Taddeo. Anthony is someone I've had the pleasure to work with on several occasions. He's performed with some great musicians, including Ron McClure, Dan Wilson, Sullivan Fortner, just an extraordinary drummer. He has over 30 credits under his name as far as recording and has quite a number of projects that he works on playing the drums. So, Anthony, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, man. It's a pleasure. I'm based in Cleveland, by the way.
Oh, I said, you know what? They're both
There's
C's. That's
there's
why.
too many C cities in Ohio. It's not your fault. There's
Yeah, yeah.
Columbus, there's Cincinnati, there's Cleveland.
No, sorry about that.
You're fine.
So, I was thinking about how I was going to introduce you today. And when I thought about you, I said, you're a drummer that if someone does not enjoy working with you, they really should have their ears checked.
I appreciate it.
You're
I
such a joyous performer. You bring so much to the table when you play. So is it really always feel like a joyous thing whenever you get behind the kit, or is it, do you still feel like it's a career too, that or does the joy always come into the career is what I wanted to ask you.
yeah, that's a great question because that is probably one of the number one comments I get after shows is people saying like, "Wow, you're like smiling the whole time." I don't know, man. To me, I feel like it's really important not to lose the magic of this being such a blessing to be able to do, to make a living. It's absolutely absurd that we get to do music and support a family. And I guess that joy just kind of manifests itself on every gig. And I think it's something really important because I used to, when I was younger, I used to get pretty upset if I would make mistakes at gigs and all that kind of stuff. You know, we've all been there where after a gig, we harp on all the mistakes that we made and we just get so bummed out about like how much we suck or whatever. But at some point I started to realize like when I do that, I'm making the whole gig about me and I'm negating the experience of everyone else, whether it was the other musicians or the audience. I'm negating the fact that maybe it was really beautiful for them and I'm just focusing on me. And so like from that point I've just tried to every time I play kind of sit in that joy and just sit in the present and be so thankful for the fact that I even get to play music at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's great to hear. I mean, is it something, you mentioned that you used to get kind of upset and stuff at gigs. Was it something you you gradually had to work on, or was it just like you maybe had some sort of, spiritual experience at a gig, or when did the shift start to happen, do you think?
It was definitely a I feel like anytime as musicians we're trying to reframe our perspective on something as deep as the way that we view ourselves musically, that it is a constant process of just slowly reminding ourselves of the truth after every single gig, after every single rehearsal, after every single practice, after you write every song, whatever it is, like it's a constant process. It's like many religions have like this mantra that you say over and over and over again, right? The reason why you do that is because that's the type of repetition that it takes to really get an effective change in here. And so I think that for me, that's been what it's like. It's like after every gig, even in the middle of a song, you make a mistake and you're like bummed out for a second, and it's like just let you practice just letting that go as soon as possible. Like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It happened. It's a representation of who I am right now in this second, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear because, the more I've been talking with people and, even reflecting recently, we want to do, that doesn't negate that we want to do the best we can, but, treating every gig like life or death certainly, isn't helpful.
Right.
Aside from the joy that you experience when you play, what aspects about your personality or your inner life seem to come to the drum set, maybe things you can't like that you get from playing that you don't get from anywhere else?
That's a great question. I feel like when in the midst of a performance, you're kind of not to get too weird sounding, but I do feel like it kind of transports you to a different plane of existence where whatever you might have been going through that day doesn't really matter in that moment. And I think that's a really special thing about performing that there have been times I've been super sick. There have been times it's been something really heavy going on in my life. But then as soon as you enter into this performance type of community, especially with an audience, the energy is different. Everybody's focus is just right in the now. It's such a beautiful practice. Um, Engaging with people like that. I think it's pretty special.
Yeah, you're also you're very lucky too because you were based on the East Coast for for a period of time in New York and now being back in the wonderful city of Cleveland.
That's it. That's it.
So no, what I did want to ask you was, typically I can't help myself in this situation, but you were privileged to study with Jimmy Cobb, who was on the number one selling jazz record of all time, the record that changed jazz, Kind of Blue.
Hmm.
So, if you don't mind, just, can you spend just a couple minutes talking about your experience with him, what it was like, interacting with him, because at this point, it's just, he's no longer with us. So,
Yeah, thankfully, I still have some of those. He let me record our lessons together. And so I still have some of those that I go back and listen to from time to time. And even though it was, gosh, almost 15 years ago that I was at the new school, um, feels like there were moments of it that I didn't even, life was such a blur. I was like barely able to really grasp the greatness that I was in front of in those lessons. Like, I do remember though trying to make sure I got to hear him play as much as possible. So we'd be talking about a subject and I'd be like, "Can you just like demonstrate that for me?" Just to like see him in action, to see him play. And then I had so many questions because he played with so many of my favorite musicians. Um, and so it was a lot of talking, it was a lot of mentorship. I was totally blown away by how humble he was, an incredibly gentle spirit. And it's sobering to realize like, okay, this is someone that I've held on a pedestal my whole life, and then it's like we get a chance to hang out and meet together, and it's like, oh, he's a human, he's
yeah,
a
I mean,
person.
it's hard not to ask about Jimmy Cobb, but you mentioned he was very humble. I saw him at the Vanguard play, and like on the second set, I just saw him grabbing a slice of pizza by himself upstairs, just, look like a regular guy. So it's cool to hear you say that.
Yeah, yeah, he's an absolute sweetheart.
So, what's one thing that you take with you as far as maybe lessons learned or maybe some advice you got early on getting started that you think is still the most valuable to this day? Even if it was advice that you went the other direction, did anyone say anything to you that maybe opened up your mind to how your career was going to go in that way?
That's a good question. I don't know if there was any specific. I don't know if there was any specific advice from an individual, but there are definite like life lessons that were pretty pivotal in my development and that I remember very vividly. And like one
Hmm.
of those being in New York that was really helpful was that there are so many people that are just so incredibly talented that New York has a real way of like kind of helping you figure out who you are as an artist. There's no room for you to like BS that you're something you're not, if that makes sense.
Oh,
So
definitely.
so in Cleveland before I moved to New York, um, I could get away with like pretending that I play salsa music and pretending that I play reggae and all these other things. And then when you get to New York, you're like, no, there is like there's this cat who plays salsa music because he's been playing it since he was 5 years old. You know what I mean? It's not like
Hmm.
he just learned a couple grooves and so he can sit in with this group. It's like this whole group of salsa musicians, this is their life. So don't even come in here pretending like just because you know a cascara and a montuno that like you can play in this group. And it was just really refreshing for me because it made me ask myself a lot of questions like who am I really? What are my strengths? What makes me unique as an individual? And kind of kind of tied into what we were talking about earlier, like this whole realization of you can't be something that you're not. The only thing you can do in art in general is just be the truest representation of yourself, because no one else has the experiences that you have. No one else has, no one else is Abe. No one else is
Yeah.
Anthony.
I
You're the
actually I read a quote last night that I'm going to try and bring into practice, which is if you don't compare and you don't compete, everyone will respect you. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I think there's value to it. But yeah, you're totally right. And you know, developing, like you're saying, there's no one else is that person. There's no denying that you can play swing and you can play all straight grooves and all this type of things. The one thing I was also curious about was where do you think you draw inspiration from that's completely unrelated to music these days?
Well, I guess the corniest answer would be my kids. But it is true. They're like in a place right now, they're in specific ages where the whole world is still really charming, and you can probably hear them running upstairs now. And like every time they learn a new skill, it's amazing. And they just have such a wonder about it all. Like they're both playing music right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so to see them really loving that and figuring out ways to experience that with them that doesn't involve any pressure or like you have to go practice. It's just this really beautiful community piece for us right now. That's been really eye-opening. And then my wife is a visual artist, so I love visual art. Like we have an incredible art museum in Cleveland, and going there is free, and just sitting in the galleries, sitting still, looking at some of this beautiful art, that is incredibly inspiring.
Did becoming a father, obviously it brings so like a total, your life does a complete 180 when you become a father. Did it change the way you play, you think at all? Or maybe you brought new
Yeah,
emotion to the instrument,
it
something like
it
that?
it did because it gave me less time to practice. So yeah, there was a part of myself that I had to be a little bit, you know, a little more disciplined because I wasn't able to practice as much. So it was like a little different on gigs sometimes. But no, I don't know. That's a good question. I think every experience in life changes how we play, you know? Every day can change how we play depending on what we're keeping ourselves open to. So, yeah, it definitely has changed the way I play. I don't know if I can like quantify any specifics, but um I feel like that's the beautiful thing about jazz is that you're always in the moment, and so you're kind of forced to grapple with stuff that's happening throughout your day or throughout your week or throughout your year, and you're presenting that in this musical form for people to enjoy.
No, and it's interesting too because I was going to ask you what you were most grateful for about in your career up to this point, but you're just your total approach is just about that you feel that being a professional musician that we're in a privileged position, I think says a lot on its own.
Yeah, yeah, I
Uh,
agree.
so let's talk a little bit about going back to Cleveland because you grew up in Ohio. You
Hmm.
went to the to New York and then went back. Do you feel like it was almost like a full circle kind of thing? Or I know you still get to travel and play and everything like that, but how did it feel to go back once made your mark on New York, you think?
Well, when we wanted to move back, it was because we wanted to start a family, and I knew my wife wasn't crazy about New York. She liked it enough, but she wanted to be back home where, because both sets of our parents are from here. And so we knew if we wanted to start a family that it would be much easier to do it in a place where you have free childcare. So we came back here, and I kind of thought it was going to be the end of my career, to be frank. I wasn't sure like what was going to happen. I thought, man, once you leave New York, dude, like that's it. And I have been so pleasantly surprised at the level of musicianship this kind of renaissance that's been happening in Cleveland. There's an insane amount of really wonderful composers and players here. And so this has been like the best that my career has ever been. I'm getting to play a lot and it's cheap enough to live here that I can support a family by playing music. I mean, that's nuts.
Yeah, I mean, people do put New York on a pedestal, but my feelings are that no matter where you go, there are amazing, amazing players. It does not matter, and especially now, I kind of feel like one thing that came out of COVID is just that in terms of jazz, wherever you go, there you are now, just because everything changed after the pandemic.
That's right. That's right. The pandemic feels like it's made location less important than ever.
Yeah, so how was that for you not being able to perform during that time? Like how did you get to practice more or did you take up any new interests or anything? Because we're not in front of people playing, we're missing that thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky in a couple ways because I have a little recording set up in my basement, and there were a bunch of people trying to do, collaborative remote recordings and things like that. And I honestly was working quite a bit during the pandemic just in my home. And then I also was in um, I was getting into some electronic stuff too, which was really fun. So trying to figure out there was like a solo project that developed out of the pandemic just from, you know, being in the
Like
house.
Square Pusher, you mean stuff like that? Or
It,
my
it so my stuff was more a little bit more free and texture driven than it is like EDM or anything like that. So it was like a lot of percussion going through looping pedals and a lot of percussive type of electronics. Electronics. There's a thing called like the ocean drum or the wave drum by Korg, and it's super cool. It's like was made, I want to say in the late '90s, and it's like the one of the first drum pads that ever came out, and it's got all these weird sounds on it. It's super fun, and so just figuring out more textures. I love textures as a drummer. It's one of my favorite things. It's finding new textures, and so that whole electronic thing opened up like a whole different world of textures for me.
Yeah, and but also playing in any jazz configuration provides a number of textures as well, depending upon the instrumentation and what to you as a drummer do you look for? What makes the performance like in that? You mentioned the word like there's a certain level of consciousness that comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
What for you? What makes the performance, you know, at the highest level when you're, working with other people or even going to hear music? What do you think it is?
The question being, what is it that makes it like that takes it to the highest level? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because there's something, when you feel like, oh, that was like
Yeah.
whoa, something happened there. Or when you're going to like hear music, like I'll give you like, just for instance, it almost feels like everyone's just on the same, like seeing like just hearing everything exactly the same, or just the way the arcs of the solos happen, or it could be the
Yeah.
dynamics. Like what do you think it is for you?
Yeah, I think, people ask me a question a lot of like, what's your favorite style of music to play? And I just think it's always about the people that you're playing with. And so when you're playing with people that aren't afraid to be open and honest and even a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Vulnerable. I think that's for me when the greatest music happens. And then, of course, there's a component of the audience, right? Because audiences vary so much. You just never know when you're going to have an audience that is super attentive and what kind of environment are you in? Is it like really close? Do they feel far away? So all those factors play into it definitely. But as far as just yeah, I think that when I find myself playing the best music, it's some kind of combination between all those things.
The
Having
audience
the
plays a big part, though, it sounds like.
Yeah, the audience and the people that you're playing with, I'm not gonna I'm definitely a relational person. And so if I know the people that I'm playing with and I feel like the deeper our friendship goes, I feel like the deeper the music can go, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. I mean, that's a that's a good point to bring up too, because, I remember when I met you, I thought you were very personable and everything. It's a shame the first gig we played, I thought the sound was just like I couldn't even.
That
But
was crazy.
I remember. I wanted to ask you too because you're talking about openness, and this is actually. So I think on one of the gigs I just started, I'm like, let's just play like some pop tunes, like we played like American Woman and stuff. Like, and I'm just like in those moments like that, when people throw things at you, do you feel like, oh shit, or all right, like let's just see what happens, like, or a mix of both? What approach do you take on those, all right, situations?
I love those
Oh,
situations.
okay, good.
Yeah, I think because you can only I get a little bit of a rush when I get those moments because you can only experience something for the first time once. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
that's like such a rush. Like as a musician, when you've played so many gigs, you're just like sometimes you can get into the same standards and you can get into the same groove and you're just like, okay, this is cool and maybe we can get pretty deep on some of this stuff. But then when you get an opportunity or you get in this place and it's like totally different, it's like uncharted waters, that's super exciting.
yeah, when
And
there's no precedent at all to that to whatever you're gonna play, right?
yeah, so I love that. I love that kind of stuff. I love when people hire me for a gig and like I've never really heard their music before and we're just going to kind of get together and play. I mean, everyone's listening so hard. That's the other thing that's really cool about those types of situations. It's a really fun way to get everyone just to like snap out of, oh, I'm sight reading all these charts or whatever, and to like just their listening ears are huge and just the energy's cool. I love those moments.
Yeah, talk about do you ever get nervous or anything before you play, or you just kind of do you like to tell yourself anything, or need to just play some snare warm-ups? Like, I'm curious about that too.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I've just recently started doing more warm-up stuff because uh, as I get older, it just feels better to get a little bit warmed up. When I was like in my 20s, I could care less to warm up. I didn't do anything. But now it feels like taking better care of my wrists and just tendons and thinking about all that kind of stuff is important. As far as like kind of gosh, what was the other part of the question you were talking about?
Oh,
Something
like,
that's
do you have to
my
tell,
system.
do you tell yourself anything, like,
Yeah.
maybe a mantra, or, just take one deep breath, or anything like that you have?
Right, right. Sorry. Yeah, yeah. I don't really get nervous so much anymore, unless it's like my group and I've booked this show that's really important, and I don't know how many people are going to show up. But typically, all those nerves kind of go away within like the first song, even if I do have nerves.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So no, and a lot of the like mantra type stuff that I tell myself is, all those things that we were talking about in the beginning, where it's just let go of all the stuff in your head that's making you doubt or second guess yourself that there's no room for it on the stage.
Yeah, let go and feel the gratitude. Who would you like to work with, that you haven't gotten a chance to work with? Any genre, any artist, because I'd like to know that as well.
Yeah, one of my heroes is Becca Stevens, actually.
Okay,
And getting to collaborate with her or work with her someday would be a total honor. It'd be super cool. Um,
we'll have to like hashtag her or something in the post.
there you go. There you
You know,
go.
people, we have a certain way of reaching people. What about if you could go back to the 1950s or 60s or something, and you had the one night only to play with any of the masters who aren't here anymore?
I feel so generic to say the Miles Davis Quintet of the
No, I
60s.
would not at all, not at all.
It feels like that would be so many people's answer, but I just love that music so much. And it's honestly like that, like the ESP record, for instance, is one of the most influential records of my life. I mean, it's one of those things that I just keep going back to, and it's just like every time you listen to the four more recordings, I mean, that quintet was just freaking amazing. It would be so fun to feel that type of energy.
Yeah, I have always thought about that recording is if you wanted to teach someone how to interact with the band, like it's all there.
It
Yeah.
absolutely is. And it's set up like how we play modern jazz today. It's crazy that we're still in many ways harkening back to that sound, you know.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear that. The the last thing I wanted to ask you was about, starting to when you decided that this was what I was going to do, because a lot of people are so talented, but their parents don't encourage them and stuff. Like I knew this one guy in high school. He really wanted to be a singer. He wanted to go to school for classical voice, but
Hmm.
his parents were just not having it at all. So when did you decide like this is what I'm going to do? Because so many people go to music school and not even that they drop out, they finish, but then it's just goodbye after that.
Yeah, man. A couple things that I try to tell my students that are in high school are you've heard this cliche saying of like, oh, music school's for you if you can't picture yourself doing anything else. And it's like,
Yeah.
that is so lame. Like, of course, an 18-year-old is going to say, yeah, I can't picture myself doing anything else because they're super in love with music at that point. But I think the real test is like, picture yourself doing music and never getting famous, never getting enough gigs, never getting paid enough. Do you still want to do it? You know what I mean? Like, never getting where you think you have the potential to get to. Do you still want to do it? Do you still love it so much that it's just the literal experience of playing music that's important to you, or is getting famous or playing with certain people? You know, and so I feel like that's one thing that a lot of young people don't realize. And then, for me, I had originally thought that I was gonna go into theater and dance because that was a big part of my life growing up in high school. And then I saw this is kind of crazy because Roy Haynes just passed away, right?
I know, rest his soul. Seriously.
And I remember being in high school and seeing a video of Roy Haynes playing in like his 83rd birthday or something like that. And I was like, whoa, the longevity in this career is incredible. It would be super amazing to be doing something that I love into my 80s, just being able to play gigs still. And so that was when I kind of made the decision to move toward music. But every step along the way has challenged me in a way that I had not originally expected it to. And it's made me second guess a lot about myself. And it's also helped me realize like anything that I want to tackle in this life, if I put enough time and energy into it, I probably can do it.
Yeah.
And I would not trade those life lessons for anything. And for any parents that might be doubting that there's worth to pursuing music, I would say that the skills that you learn in this are like far surpass any. It's just so invaluable. It's invaluable. Like the way that you learn to push yourself when you're chasing after a degree or a profession in music is it translates to anything. So even if they don't end up being professional musicians, like they're going to be very accustomed to working hard and chasing after a goal, you know?
Work ethic and patience, um, and self-compassion, a lot of things
That's
like
right.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, no, this is great. It's so great to catch up with you, and I'm glad we got a chance to do this. Where can people, if they want to, follow you or anything, where can you be reached?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram, AV That's Taddeo. And then my group, which is based on bringing new life and recognition to Italian folk music by kind of mixing it with more modern jazz elements, can also be found on Instagram. It's called Alla Boara, ALlaBoara. So it looks like Bora, Alla Boara. And that's, yeah, you just Google that mess and you'll find a bunch of stuff.
Just go on Yahoo, not Google, right? I
Oh,
don't even
that's
know
right. Shoot.
who uses Yahoo. I don't even know who uses Yahoo. But no, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Of course, man. It was an absolute pleasure, Abe. It's great to see you again.
Good to see you.